Algebra lesson 2-4 and 2-5. Matrix is a rectangular arrangement of numbers into horizontal rows and vertical columns. I know that most people have heard of the movie The Matrix, and every time they were talking about the Matrix, it was a whole list of numbers going down. Those lists of numbers would be the vertical columns, and then across were the horizontal numbers. They will look something like this. This would be your horizontal rows, and these would be your vertical columns. They don't have to be 2 by 2. You could have 2, 3, 4, -1, 0, 7. You could have this configuration of a matrice. But a singular matrix is going to have both vertical and horizontal. Each one of these numbers inside the matrix itself is considered an entry. We also call them an element. So this is one entry, that's another entry. And we want to make sure we're paying attention to those entries because they match up with other matrices, elements. We have a multiplication rule on page 93 dealing with positive and negative numbers. If you have the same signs, if you're multiplying two numbers together and they have exactly the same signs, or if you have a whole bunch of numbers being multiplied together and you count up the negative signs and there is an even number of them, meaning you count them up and there's 2 negative signs, or there's 4, 6, 12 negative signs, then when you get done multiplying, you will have a positive answer. If you multiply and they are different signs, or an odd number of negative signs, then your answer will be negative. So, for example, -4 multiplied by -6. They have the same sign. There's 2 negative signs. That means it's going to become a positive. If it were -4 times a positive 6, there's only one negative sign. They're different. Therefore, it would be -24. If you had -2 times -3 times -6 times -1, 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives, that's an even number of negative signs. That means it's going to be a positive answer. 3 times, you can multiply it anywhere you want. 3 times 6 is 18. 18 times 1 is 18. And 18 times 2 is 36. This would be a positive 36. But if just one of those numbers were not positive, -2 times -3 times -6 times +1, 1, 2, 3, that's an odd number of negative signs. This would produce a -36 for an answer. So how does this apply to our matrices? If we had a matrix of 2, 3, -2, 4, and we were multiplying this by, say, -2, we have to take this -2 and multiply it by each piece, each element or entry of that matrix to give us now negative times a positive. They are different signs. One negative sign, that'll make -4. But negative times a negative, they're the same sign. So that'll make +4. -2 times a positive, that's a different sign, -6. And -2 times 4, that's a different sign, -8. So that's how we would use multiplication if we were involving a matrice. Now we've got to be careful. We don't want to confuse the rules for multiplication, because in multiplication a negative times a negative equals a positive, and a positive times a positive equals a positive, but a positive times a negative equals a negative. So we want to make sure we're aware of that. That's different than addition. Positive plus positive equals, I better not use that symbol. We'll use positive plus positive equals more positive. And negative plus negative equals negative. But when it's a negative plus a positive, it depends. Depends on which you have more of. So we ask ourselves the question number one. Question number one, which one do I have more of? And question number two, how many more? So they're different rules. Now let's look at a matrix for addition. 2, 3, 5, 7 plus 0, -1, 2, -2. You can add these together because they're the same matrix. They're 2 by 2, 2 by 2. So what happens is those two will add together. 2 plus 0 is 2. These two will add together, which makes 5. These two add together, 5 plus a -1. Which do I have more of? I have more positives. How many more? 4 more. And these two will multiply together. What do I have more of? More positives. How many more? 5 more. And that would be our finished answer. So when you're adding or subtracting, they must line up. 2, 3, 7, 2. 4, 0, 9, 1, 1, 7. These two cannot be added together. They don't have the same number of elements or entries in each one of them. So there's nothing we can do. We're basically stuck at this point. Now multiplication itself has some similarities to addition in that we have properties for them. The properties are located on page 94, but there's the commutative property, which you should recognize for addition, associative property, which is also a property for addition, property of opposites, and then the property of 0. So I've given examples for each one. This is the example of the commutative again. Once again, the order does not matter. 5, 3, 2 is the order. We switched up 3, 5, 2. It still produces the same answer. 5 times 3 is 15. 15 times 2 is 30. 3 times 5 is 15. 15 times 2 is 30. So the order will not matter. That's the commutative property. Associative property involves the parentheses. So these are multiplication signs, not x's and variables. Look at the order. 5, 3, 2. 5, 3, 2. The order is exactly the same, but what's moved are the parentheses. Here, 3 and 2 are inside the parentheses, but here, 5 and 3 are inside the parentheses. That's the difference. One of the examples that I gave before for the addition, if we had 5 times 3 times 2 is equal to 3 times 2 times 5, would that be an example of associative or commutative? A lot of people think this is an example of associative simply because they see the parentheses, when in fact, it's commutative. The order has been changed. 5, 3, 2, 3, 2, 5. So don't just assume because you see parentheses that that is going to be a associative property. Next we have the property of opposites. Simply stated, if you multiply something by a -1, it will change its sign. Doesn't matter what it is, it will change the sign. Here's a positive r being multiplied by a -1. It now becomes -r. But if that had been -1 multiplied by -r, multiplying by a -1 would change that sign and it would become +r. Anytime you multiply by a negative number, you'll be changing the signs. Multiplying by -1 changes the sign. And the last one, probably the hardest property of all time, the property of 0. It's actually very easy. If you multiply something by 0, you get 0. So g times 0 is 0, 5 times 0 is 0, a billion times 0 is 0, -16 times 0 is 0, cats times 0 is 0. It doesn't matter. If you multiply it by 0, you're going to get 0.